Science is trustworthy. And when you combine criminalistics and science, you get the forensics. We need to search for justice, to punish evildoers, to stop evildoers and criminals. We need factual answers. We don't have facts. We can't be sure who's guilty. We can't be sure we're actually punishing the right people or we're stopping crime at all. So we need facts. That's the idea of science. Science produces facts. Science teaches us facts. The idea is if we have scientific rules of the physical universe, then we know these rules apply even if we weren't actually there. If we have a cause, we know what must have happened. So we can actually understand what happened in the past. If we have facts about the cause, we can understand what actually happened. This is based on the idea that the rules of the physical universe do not change, which is pretty true. Gravity was working thousands of years ago. It's working now too. The speed of light didn't change. Chemistry didn't change. Reactions didn't change. Flammable objects were flammable then. They're flammable now. Rules of the physical universe do not change. Therefore, if we have the cause, we understand the cause, we can understand the results of this. This provides us with facts, unbiased facts. Not reliant on people. However, as far as criminalistics are concerned, we must rely on people too. We don't have to, but we pretty much do. We rely on witnesses. There is nothing whatsoever, nothing scientific at all about trusting witnesses. But we do trust them, and they are an integral part of the justice system. Without witnesses, we might not have any leads. A witness tells us, oh, I saw this happening. That enables the forensic people to say, hey, wait, if that happened, we have to be able to prove it. Or the witness claims something, and the forensic people, they show that it's actually untrue. But we definitely rely on witnesses. If witnesses say that a crime occurred, we do trust them. The thing about witnesses is that they're not scientific, but nevertheless, they're certainly trusted. I mean, don't you want people to trust you when you say something? Because you're telling the truth. Witnesses do tell the truth. It's not scientific to believe them, but we do in court. We also rely on common sense, scientific or not. If we have 10 witnesses to something that someone was running from the crime scene, it could be they all blinked and he really ran not from the crime scene, they just thought he was, but common sense, we use that too. That, they didn't all close their eyes at a certain time. We do use common sense. Now, there's something called the CSI effect. It comes from the show, CSI. It's a show where they prove that the person committed the crime based on the scientific science, which is probably done within a half hour, which is certainly not realistic. But anyway, and people say, well, it works so well that the only way to prove something is if science proves it. But that's not true. We do rely on things other than science. We rely on witnesses. For thousands of years before we had the science, we certainly relied on witnesses. So that does not mean, if the fact that you do not have scientific proof, the fact that you don't have DNA proof, does not mean that the person can't be guilty. You can certainly be guilty without. That's a CSI effect. That if it's not science, he must be innocent. That's not true. There was an interesting question that was brought up in the O.J. Simpson trial. The idea was that scientifically they were able to show that the DNA of the victim was found on O.J. Simpson or O.J. Simpson's clothing. This was the science that the DNA showed it was of the victim. Okay, that's what it was all reliant on, the scientific rule. We know DNA always worked, so DNA works in this case too. This DNA was found on O.J. Simpson, and we can scientifically show that this DNA was that of the victim. So O.J. Simpson was in contact with the victim, and he probably was the perpetrator. So the question was, can we rely on the science? And you better believe that O.J. Simpson's $1 million lawyers were going to say, no, you cannot rely on the science. So how do you avoid this? How do you say this? Well, they gave an example. First, they were back and forth. There was the defense lawyers or defense expert witness and the accusations expert witness. And this is the one that the defense said. Scientific principles rely on rules. And his example was that of a duck. If you take something that you know is a duck and you see it's white, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you know that you've seen every duck. And every time you have a duck, it's always white. You now have a scientific rule that if you find a duck in the future, that duck will be white. And we can assume that the future duck will be white. But he said, but wait a minute, we've only seen 5 ducks. We didn't see all the ducks in the world. Maybe if we see a 6th duck, it'll actually be black. And if it is, we have to change our scientific rules. So science can't necessarily prove for everything because you didn't see everything. You didn't see every single duck. And so he said, well, scientists might say that this DNA belonged to the victim, but maybe we'll have some more science, more observation that'll show that you can't rely on the science. Okay, that was the defense. The accusation had to respond to this, and they responded saying no, that if you have a scientific rule, you must keep the scientific rule. But even though we did not check every single duck in existence, if we find, let's say, a sixth duck that's black, we have to start asking questions. We do not immediately discard the science. The rule remains. We have to explain what's going on with this duck. You can't disprove the rule just by finding a duck that's black. Maybe the duck fell in the mud. Maybe the duck was painted. Maybe it was in a shadow and it looks black. But the scientific rule must remain. So, after hearing both of these things, the judge didn't interrupt the people talking, but he interrupted the proceedings, and he said, so wait a minute. The first scientist said that science cannot prove anything because things might change. The second person said that science can't disprove anything. So science can't prove anything. You can't disprove anything. What good are science? What good are scientists? The answer, we really have to rely on, among other things, common sense. For example, if the duck, we found a sixth duck that's black, maybe the duck just came out of a paint factory where they use black paint all the time. So yeah, it makes sense the duck is black. But if a duck was always in a house and it was never in the mud, then you'd have to change the rules. But if the duck was in a paint factory, then you can actually say that no, the rules remain. The rules do remain in science because we don't assume major changes. But if you want to say a change, you can explain it. We rely on common sense to know whether things change. We can see from here that lawyers argue back and forth that if there is some common sense involved in a court of law, you're going to see what lawyers are fighting back and forth to show whether this science actually could be applied. They can still, even if it's science, even if it's forensic evidence, they can still fight in certain ways. We'll see more about what lawyers do later.